So good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do on Monday afternoons to figure out the future for smarter buildings. Our profiles are listed on mondaylive.org, just in case you're wondering who we are. And also just a reminder that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. So keep that in mind, please. Please do post questions, comments, chit-chat, and other sensible words on the Zoom chat, so we can make this as interactive as possible. And also this slide deck is also available on mondaylive.org, right on the homepage. You just sort of scroll down a little bit, so in case you need any of the links. This month in September, we've been talking about, or we are talking about, the changing landscape, and we're going to continue this this week. So looking forward to that. Agenda, normals, chit-chat, news and chit-chat, and trends, and then we talk about the changing landscape. And today we're going to be talking about the experience side of the changing landscape. So that hopefully will be really interesting, and then whatever discussion we have. But before we get into that, hand it over to Ken. What's going on, Ken?
Thanks, Anto. We're still hard at planning our celebration for Chicago, our 25th anniversary. We've got an article that gives you a little bit more information on the site. We're really pleased to be sharing this experience with AHR Expo. Their education seminars have been a big part of our 25 years of history, and certainly I don't think we could have done it without them. I think as an industry and people on this call, we need to kind of thank people like AHR giving us the opportunity, giving us the arena to all come together and provide free education and of the industry and the world. I think we're all so busy we don't stop and talk much about it, but somehow at AHR we tend to flash our wares and talk a little bit about what it is we actually do. So I think it's a great event, and it has certainly been the cornerstone of automated buildings. The other thing I wanted to do is what is trending with AV 2.0. That's what we're calling the reinvention from our old web style to our new one. And it is certainly all about changing landscapes. And so a couple of things I want to share with you is globalization. The last three sponsors we have are from Brazil, Australia, and UK. Everything you do and we do is viewed and analyzed globally. You are global. I think sometimes we tend to think of ourselves in our own little country or our own little neighborhood, and we've got to stop thinking that way, because as soon as you come online and you have an identity online, you are global. So I think that's one little tip I want to pass on. The next one that kind of surprised me is we were moving towards our plan to have the industry create automated buildings, and we will kind of guide them and help them and provide a platform. And the word co-operators came up. And information controlled by the industry for the industry crosses traditional editorial boundaries and the paywall approach. I hadn't quite seen that what we're doing is quite different. And what's happening in the media business, as you're aware, is media companies that sell paper magazines are struggling. And so what's happening is they're all starting to come to a common base. And I think that's a concern, because when you have something in a common base, it can be much easily, there's the word, controlled by one or two people. Whereas if it is a collection of co-operators and co-conspirators, or whatever you want to call them, it's much more difficult to manipulate. So anyway, those are just some thoughts that I wanted to pass on. Back to you, Anto.
Before you go though, Ken, on that globalization point, So one of the interesting offsets or side effects, I should say, of the whole COVID and working from home and everybody's on a Zoom meeting all day long, back to back to back. The acceptance of having global conversations over Zoom or Teams or whatever is, I believe, subtly is a lot more, goes on a lot more than what we used to. In the past, it was always, yeah, okay, I can talk to you. Let's set up a Zoom. There's a lot of coordination trying to go on, other than, time zones and stuff. But I do find that, especially me, having ad hoc global conversations in the Zoom world these days is a lot more automatic now. It's kind of like, it's not even, I hardly even think about it. And before, before you'd spend a lot of time and effort to set up this special call that I'm going to have with, Singapore for some reason. Now it's just, can we just jump on a quick call and talk about it right now type of deal.
I'd add to that, programs and platforms like Calendly.
Yeah.
Where in your email signature, once they have that, they could just click on and reserve a spot on your calendar without ever contacting you or anything. Makes it much faster to do that. So
Yeah.
Okay, the other thing I'd like to add to both those comments is, in the past, I avoided doing business with people off the North American continent because the transfer of finances was so painful through multiple banks and stuff. And with things like PayPal, global currency it's no difference taking money from Australia, Brazil, or UK than it is America, and they do my accounting for me. So yes, there's some real significant changes.
yeah, that's a good point. That's a big part of it.
Tools have just become, to do global business these days, tools have become so much easier.
Yeah, and obviously all of that happens mostly in the cloud, so we are being cloud native.
Well, I think it also is part of the changing landscape.
Yeah.
Very much part of the changing landscape that we're talking about.
Right. Okay, so moving on, talking about cloud native, I came across this blog on CNCF. CNCF is the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and obviously they're all about cloud native. So the other reason for putting this up is that if you want to really understand cloud native, read a lot of this stuff. I mean, a lot of it gets really geeky pretty quickly. So if that's not for you, then that's fine. But there's a lot of material that just talks about what cloud native is and the pieces and what people are doing with it. This comparison is actually one of the interesting things here about how you design cloud native versus how you design cloud-based applications. Basically, what you're saying here is that cloud-based application is something that was originally built for some local server or computer, then you move it to the cloud. Whereas cloud native is something that this article regards as being something that you design specifically to go in the cloud. Subtle difference because you end up in the cloud, but that's just one perspective. So there's lots of things like this on the CNCF website. So that's all I have. Rick?
Yeah, we're just going to go to office hours in October, on October 5th. We thought about having an interim session or a makeup session. We're just going to go straight to have people register for October 5th office hours, and we're going to be focusing on how people can learn more about what's going on with the coalition, specifically the IBB and 2525, and as you just described, that the Cloud Native Computing Foundation and our sort of endorsement and adapting of the CNCF principles as how they apply to our domain. And then, we'll talk a little bit about ideas for, what's next for the coalition to focus on as well. So invite everybody that wants to learn more or join us or figure out how to become more involved with the Coalition for Smarter Buildings to sign up for office hours.
Great. Looking forward to that. That should be an interesting conversation. I've updated this a little bit, but this is just a bunch of links that may be useful to people. Any other thoughts anybody want to bring up before we move on?
I
about-
do. Yeah,
Okay,
it's a
Mark.
real serious topic. In that, in case the folks attending today's Monday Live did not know, today is National Cheeseburger Day. And for all of you, there are deals out there. I just posted in the chat places where you can go get freebie cheeseburgers. So after this call, go treat yourself to a free cheeseburger somewhere. But to all of us on Monday Live today, happy National Cheeseburger Day.
Have a burger on us as long as it's from one of those freebie places.
There you go. Exactly.
Wow, Mark.
Mark, I'm a little disappointed. I'm finding this out after lunchtime.
I'm so sorry, David. I mean, you could go get a dinner, you could get that afternoon snack, you know.
Yeah, hopefully the
whatever.
folks in California will be able to take advantage of this
Yes.
knowledge.
These
Um,
are, I highly encourage it also, Mark. These are our customers, so.
I figured as much, but the question I
Yep.
would have is this. Can you get one of those plant-based cheeseburgers as well? Is that included on the freebies? Who knows, you know?
There you go. Value from attending Monday Live. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
Does anyone know if In-N-Out is doing it?
That's a good question.
Tracy, if you could please have one for me. I'm stuck in Illinois, as you know, and we don't have In-N-Out here.
Do
And
not have In-N-Out. You are not drivable inside of
It's-
24
it's-
hours. For their
no,
food.
it's an In-N-Out desert where I live, unfortunately. I did want to make one comment about what Anto said. From a software perspective, there's a term born in the cloud. So if a software application was designed and created to be SaaS-based, multi-tenant, which means, you know, potentially multiple user organizations sharing the same infrastructure, born in the cloud is a term that's frequently used. So just wanted to add that in.
Okay. Thank you for that, David. Anything else? All right. Let us move on then. So the changing landscape. So this was our script for September last week. David led us on a really interesting conversation on the changing indoor environment. We were talking about there mostly about owning buildings and the finance related to it, and also how, you know, all the challenges of Office Armageddon and related stuff. So that's all great. That was a really good conversation. This week, we're really going to be talking about experience, which is really the human side of it. It's really the relationship between humans and buildings in a different different perspectives. So that's our focus. And next week we'll talk about technology. It's kind of our plan. And just as a reminder, before we broke for summer, we had July month talking about disruptions and all of the sort of things that's going on about change, another way of thinking about change. And our conclusion at the end of that month is that really it's all about experience, how things change, right? Just a reminder that we went through all of that last July. So what is user experience? The definition is here. I think I got it from Wikipedia or somewhere. The overall experience a user has when interacting with, in this case, a building. That's our sort of context. And this really sort of encompassing all aspect from first use to their last and everything in between. I think that's all pretty straightforward. When we talk about user experience, the sort of default thing that everybody thinks about, and it's for good reason, is the occupant experience. We talked a lot about that last week. Obviously, the real estate, what's going on in real estate is sort of questioning the whole experience of occupant experience. But I think the other thing that we've talked about on and off on Monday Live is that our impact to the occupant experience is actually not as much as it could be or it should be. I mean, it's not as obvious, right? Because we're sort of on the periphery of that. Most of it is to do with other things that's outside our scope, although it's not exactly zero, right? So we don't really want to focus on this today. What we want to focus on is what I'm sort of describing as the engineering experience. And I'm using the word engineering here loosely, really talking about all of the engineering activities involved in creating products, selling products, buying products, specifying, installing, running, operating, etc. All of the stuff that happens by stakeholders, by people in our industry. So that's the focus, because we know that there are some changes going on in the industry, and that's sort of making us sort of ask, question what the experience is. And so what are the major challenges that sort of related to this? The most obvious one is the increasing complexity of systems, especially information system, is something that we talk about every week here on Monday Live, literally for the last 3 years. And then recently, the sort of realization that we're all sort of moving towards one place or one way of doing things, and that's cloud native. So that's another sort of challenge that's going. Those are all great, but it's leading to really a very significant gap, both in skill and personnel, between the sort of, I've sort of pulled out the most sort of the easiest way to think about it, HVAC engineers on one side and DevOps engineers on the other side. HVAC engineers obviously know a lot about HVAC and not really too much about IT, and DevOps is the other way around, right? So we sort of ended up in this world where we need both, and the sort of the availability of HVAC and DevOps engineers is not common across the industry. There's a lot of HVAC engineers. A lot of companies are trying to train them up to be DevOps engineers. Not sure that's really the best strategy going forward, because they're really sort of very, very different disciplines. The number of engineers that are both HVAC and DevOps is very, very limited, because it's not natural for either one to learn the other. So this is really sort of making a challenge for us to deliver a lot of the stuff we've been talking about in the last 3 years. That's kind of the challenge sort of encapsulation of where we are with respect to experience. And I think this is the one that's sort of undermining a lot of the experiential sort of aspects of the engineer experience, that I put it. Okay. So this is the challenge. We have been working on this thing called the IBB. And so for those that are not familiar with the IBB, just a brief recap. The IBB is the official name for it is the Interoperable Building Box, and it's you can see it in the diagram here. It's essentially a box, a diagrammatical box that interfaces between the local network of the building and the internet. In other words, the cloud, right? So it's a building cloud interface. But it does that by enabling containerized applications to run inside the IBB. That's what these containerized yellow boxes are. So that's really what the IBB is. The IBB can exist as a as a physical device that you install, or it can exist as a virtual device that runs in the data center. But regardless, it's always on-prem. So you remove all of the issues about the cloud being far away and intermittent and everything else. So the whole mission of the IBB is to make buildings inherently cloud native, because once you do this, the connectivity between the building with the IBB and the cloud is using all cloud native techniques and protocols and technologies. So this is really what the IBB is. So what we want to talk about, so this is kind of the concept of the IBB. What we want to talk about today is really the experience in using the IBB. What is that going to look like? And this is obviously work in progress. The IBB project is actually doing all of this, and we're hoping to get it substantially complete to a demonstrable state by the time we get to AHR. And there's still quite a bit of work, but we feel pretty good, right? So how do you install an IBB? So here we immediately go to ask, who are we talking about? Because here there are two users here that we have to consider. Think about Jake, who's an HVAC engineer, right? He is more, if you think about HVAC engineers in terms of what they typically do, they typically install controllers, automation controllers, devices, et cetera, right? So the physical entity of IBB is most likely what Jake is going to be comfortable in installing. So he orders it from whatever his vendor is, and gets delivered. He takes it out of the box and sticks it on a wall, plugs it into power and to the network, and he's up and running. On the other hand, if you take Mandy, who's a DevOps gal, she's not interested in that workflow. Her go-to is GitHub, some repo repository in GitHub, where she will look and find all the instructions on the code to be able to install an IBB, and she will use whatever tools she uses to do all of that, to actually install it, typically in the data center that she controls, so she has, right? So these two installation process you can think of as being exactly the same, because once it's done, Jake and Mandy will be provided by some documentation, an address of where they need to go to look at the IBB. It'll be some local address, and they'll do that, and they'll see some kind of welcome page to the IBB. Hello, basically, right? So the installation process is designed very, very specifically to be able to cater to both in the manner that they used to working, right? This is great. So this then leaves the IBB to be configured. What does that mean? So the IBB as a beast needs to be managed. Somebody has to manage it. That's one of the sort of the principles of the IBB. Somebody has to manage it, even if it's standalone and it's not actually part of a big complex, platform and environment. You still need to manage it, right? So the way we see this is happening is that when Jake or Mandy presses that, let's configure this thing, the first thing it comes up and says, okay, I need to be managed. I don't know, I meaning IBB. I need to be managed, and please tell me how this IBB is going to be managed. And it will list a number of management platforms for Jake or Mandy to select. And these could be platforms like what I have there, examples. It could be custom platforms. It could be supervisory platforms in the HVAC world. It can actually be potentially anything that makes sense for a cloud platform to be able to manage IBBs. So let's hear Jake has selected the Acme X Cloud, and he clicks next. And the first thing he's prompted then is, okay, now log into Acme X, whatever Acme X is. So this logs in Jake into the platform, and at the same time credentials the IBB to be part of that platform. And this is most likely going to use OpenAuth workflow, a login workflow that we use a lot of times these days. So that's pretty standard technology. And it may involve other keys or other multi-factor authentication and whatever else, even including human confirmation, if that's what the management platform dictates, right? So this is the onboarding of the IBB onto the management platform. Once that's done, Jake and Mandy is then presented with the management platform's UI here, Acme X, obviously a fictitious one, saying hello and let's get on with it. So in other words, the IBB is now installed, is now configured to the appropriate platform that's going to manage it. Okay, and is ready to use. So what next? What next is that Jake. Now I'm going to focus on Jake because he's the HVAC guy, so he knows what the IBB needs to do. So let's say that Jake needs to install an IDL app because he needs to suck data from this building that it's installed it, and he needs to have it in an IDL. So he goes to the platform, he clicks on install IBB app, and he selects from the list of apps that the platform provides And here it says haystack IDL, and he clicks next. There's probably going to be some form of configuration of that IDL, because you need to tell it something, or Jake needs to tell it something that's sort of application centric, what he wants to call things or what he wants to do. He does that, and he clicks install, and then that IDL app is installed in the IBB. The container is installed. There's nothing else involved here other than that clicking that install button. The UI of the IDL is shown to Jake. And if the IDL was doing something like collecting from BACnet devices or whatever it is, because it's actually installed in the IBB, it's actually running. So it's going to be doing whatever it's supposed to be doing, right? So this is the process of installing, in this case, an example IDL app. So Jake says, good, okay. What next? He says, I want to install a dashboard because I kind of need to see what the hell's going on with this IDL. So he goes back to the install thing, and he says, install another thing, and he says, install dashboard. And again, there's probably going to be some configuration in terms of what the dashboard needs to look like. And he does all of that, and he installs it. And then the next thing he sees is the dashboard, the UI of the dashboard, the way he wanted it to be. It's running in the IBB, and it's also connected to the IDL that he had previously installed because they had compatible data environments, right? Again, 4 steps to install that, and these are pretty simple steps. So what's sort of going on here? So let's just do a little recap. So Jake is productive. He was able to do his work efficiently. He can continue. He can obviously rinse and repeat and install any other app that he needs to do his work, whether it's grid app or analytics or whatever. He knows that all of the apps that he installs comply with the IT policies because it's already attached to a management platform that is attached to the building owner's environment, and his co-workers can all be using the IBB and the apps in them, right? So it's basically a sort of it deals with all of the needs that Jake has. Mandy, if she is involved at all, she's the DevOps person. She is optionally involved, as you saw, right? Most of the work is actually done by Jake. To Mandy, if it's a physical box, then to Mandy, the IBB is a well-managed and secure device. Just like in any sort of enterprise environment, if you've onboarded a laptop or a computer, the environment knows about it and it's comfortable and it's controlling it in the manner that it needs to. So the IBB will be the same way. And if it's a virtual installation that Mandy did, I showed you earlier, then the IBB is a service that Mandy and her team in the IT department or in the provider can fully manage that, right? And she can do all of that using her tools that she's familiar with, and she doesn't need to know anything about HVAC. Right. So the IBB is then securely and responsibly used and managed by Jake and his team and Mandy when needed, and anybody else that needs to use the IBB and the apps. That leads both Jake and Mandy to be happy. Their bosses should be happy because he was able to do it, or they were able to do it very, very efficiently. The CISO is happy because it all abides by a policy. The vendors are happy because basically what Jake has done is install applications from vendors without Jake ever having to call or refer to the vendor for help or figuring out how to install the Kubernetes, whatever. Right? None of that happened. He just did it. And ultimately, customers are happy because of that, because the system is there and up and running, right? Now, I would argue that this can actually wind back to feed the satisfaction of the experience of the occupants that we actually started off with, because whatever they're doing efficiently and well should help with that. And really, the only sort of remaining question from both Jake and Mandy is, what else can I do here? Because I can, my opportunities have been sort of opened up and unleashed, and Mandy's saying, this is kind of okay, right? So that's kind of the way I think about the experience in the IBB, and the IBB team is obviously this is the same vision of the whole group. Love to open it up to this group to think about the sort of what people are going to think about this, how this would actually work in this specific industry. We know the industry very well. We know the ups and downs, and love to get everybody's thoughts on this.
So Stephen brought up a point in the chat, Anto, which I'm sure several others have a similar thought. Suppliers already have gateways, right? Site gateways. How would this be different to, or is it the same as an IBB, or are those gateways? So for argument's sake, let's say I'm an IoT company and I've got some occupancy sensors and I've got my gateway, which probably maybe Kubernetes based or Docker based. Would that be defined as IBB compliant?
Well, a gateway typically, the gateway that people are used to today are typically single purpose gateways to do something very specific to a specific vendor. Right. That's kind of what they do, and it's also the downside of it, because it can't do anything else typically in most cases. You can think of an IBB as a gateway, but it's an open gateway because it doesn't actually, when I went through and installed the IBB, it didn't actually have any software in it to do anything. It's only when Jake installed things, right? So the first thing I showed was the installing of an IDL, and then showing installing of a dashboard. That effectively could be seen as being installing a gateway into the IBB. So gateways could be software that runs in the IBB, but gateways on its own, in the old view, is actually a standalone gateway that really is not an IBB. And functionally, it does the same thing, but it's only very specific to its design purpose.
So as an example, let's say that Tritium takes it in that direction. If Tritium had a Niagara IDL, you could do that same process of putting a JACE solution into the IBB, right? If they were IBB compliant from an IDL downloading process. And
the Niagara platform is available as a container, so it's actually on our list of things to do for the IBB team. Stick it in the IBB, and then it'll be a Niagara station running in an IBB.
Right.
And on that same IBB could be the software for that IoT vendor, if in fact they containerize their software.
Right.
So there you go. Now we've got a multi-tenant, multi-purpose, and it's exactly what we're hoping to demonstrate at AHR, is to be able to show, hopefully before then, and that's what we'll be trying to recruit for, is more vendors to be able to say, okay, what do I have to do to adapt my software or my service or my solution or whatever to be able to use this more open platform.
So, Anto, with regard to the IBB, from the occupant's perspective, historically, software-wise, we're very device and equipment oriented. We're not tenant focused. So if I'm a tenant on the 10th story of a building, and I've been told there's this cool thing called the IBB in the building, I need some way to, and I'm curious, what's the temperature in my space and the humidity and the air quality and so on. I need some, in assuming Jake put the IDL in there, the raw data is there in theory, okay? The experience, which is what we wanted to talk about, is not going to be there from, let's say Niagara was the way that I got the data. There's no tenant experience built in. to Niagara today. So I think this is one of the challenges that remains here is from the application perspective. How do you turn the data into something that's tenant friendly, tenant accessible, tenant controlled, from a security perspective, so that it's easy? And I don't recall us having any conversations so far about that aspect of it.
So the tenant, there may be a tenant app that Acme Corp or somebody have created.
Yep.
Right. That this particular tenant that you're referring to is used to, because it's he or she, they're already using it in a couple of other offices around the country, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. Then the process will be, he would say to Jake, hey, could you please install the app, the name of which, the details.
Yep.
And Jake will say, yeah, sure, I'll do that. Is it compatible to IBB? Yes. I just install it. He will go through a process similar to he did when he was installing the dashboard that I did.
Yep.
And at that point, then that particular tenant app would be running, would be accessing the data in the IDL, and would be able to be providing that particular tenant with whatever services that they are used to, given that particular app, obviously whatever the specifics are. But the point is that, and again, there's kind of like two experiences, right? So here we're talking about desiring an experience for the tenant, right? But just imagine how that would look like, what Jake would have to do that without this architecture involved, right? Let's assume if it's not cloud native, then how is he going to do that? It's really, really hard, right? If it's cloud native, if it's IBB compatible, then he just needs to install it in this similar process, in the process similar to what I just showed you, and he can handle it. He didn't need to worry Mandy or anybody else.
Yeah, I'm just curious, if Mark, Ken, David, the rest of the guys on this call, from the tenant perspective, tenant app perspective, are there really products out there that already exist, that are ready to go with this kind of architecture?
Like Niagara.
Yeah, like they could plug into Niagara easily, and basically, yeah, I've got a Niagara. Here's the data. It would know how to extract the appropriate data for that particular tenant on that particular floor or floors, and do it in a secure way that didn't violate, the rest of the product. That's my concern. Is like, how do we? Because we're talking about the Jake's experience, which I agree is great, but the user experience, where we know the users want to have access to the data that once they understand that it exists, are we really, has the market evolved enough to where the IDLs have been designed in such a way that they're tenant app friendly?
Yeah, that's what all these RFPs have been asking for. And that's what they've been either having to build in-house, or that's why we're going after the hardware piece, to be able to bring everything to a common platform where for the first time ever, all the data is made to be available from the same architecture. But that's what all these enterprise RFPs that we've been hearing about, that's what they've all been about.
Asking for, right? Yeah. So I'm saying, what you're telling me, Rick, is that there is a gap there.
Yes.
And I'm just trying to, I want us to acknowledge the gap, so that as we move forward with the discussion, we're not only coming out with a specification for the IBB hardware, but we're also driving the conversations around how the data has to be accessible to these third-party apps.
Yeah, which is really a message to vendors of software applications.
Right.
Basically,
exactly.
the task there is make it compatible to the IBB. Right. The first step of that is to containerize it. I think most people that are have developed software, certainly in the last 10 years, are probably already there or already
Yep.
on the way there. And then be able to understand how the IBB works in terms of discovering capabilities that's available in the IBB that can match their needs, right?
So a few comments. The containers obviously need to allow API
Yes.
exchanges between the different containers to address I think it's important to loop this back to the C4SB, original documentation, as well as the 2525 approach, where we're looking at this from an operations perspective and a tenant experience perspective. And I think we can look at operations as an experience unto itself for the operations staff, building staff, maintenance, facility management, property management, and tenant management, but tenant experience. So by putting together, we are optimizing it for both of those groups, the operational experience group and the tenant group. And the projects I've done that have been most successful in this type of interfacing, we used Active Directory as the basis exchange for that list. And each tenant, if it was a multiple tenant experience, each had their own Active Directory system, and we, put in the connections where appropriate. What's interesting, though, is when we start to look at the future, I really think that what we need to enable is a standardized way of this happening. And this is where our industry is horribly lacking in standards. And this is, I think, where we're going to run into a wall, because there are IT-based and software development standards for sharing, lists of people and things like that in a secure way. And I think one of the things that needs to be focused on is understanding how we're recommending that to happen, or how that even could happen, because that's central to making this dream a reality. That's thing number one. Thing number two is that we want this architecture to work for any scale building. So when I think of a 50,000 square foot, 7-story office building that's, a couple blocks from my house here, they don't have enough square footage for a full-time staff. There's a person who supports multiple buildings from a maintenance perspective. We need this IBB to enable an asset holder with lots of little buildings to be able to, manage that portfolio in an effective way. And it could be a very inexpensive way to create a higher level of tenant experience at the same time through the integration of access control and things like that. So I think it's absolutely crucial we think of solutions for both the smallest assets all the way to enterprise corporate portfolios.
And that was part of the point of the management platform that I talked about at the beginning. Because you saw one of the choices I actually had there was actually Active Directory. That makes sense if you go into an environment where that is the way everything is managed, then IBB should be managed in exactly the same way, right? So and that's not the only way. There's obviously other ways, but that's absolutely right.
Who in your world, Anto's, would be supplying an IBB?
An IBB, the IBB itself, the
Yeah.
hardware. So the software is just going to be there on GitHub, most likely, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the Mandy's.
I'm sorry, but yeah, I didn't mean the physical hardware. Sorry, I mean the platform.
The platform
Oh,
itself.
Mandy, Mandy has this friend Bob. Bob's going to bring it.
Bob's going to do it.
Yeah,
Big Bob.
There's always a Bob. Do you notice that?
there has to be. That's why I had to throw that in.
So
Sorry,
so
to cut across, Santo.
this project in the coalition is basically building the IBB specification. And these days, a specification of a cloud native thing is basically instruction of one big YAML file that sort of is instruct how you install everything. That's basically what we're building. And that will end up being available most likely on GitHub for anybody to install, because we've committed to make IBB open source. So that's the software part of it. Now you take a hardware vendor that wants to sell IBBs because they think they can sell lots of these boxes because that's the business they're in. Then what they would do is they would find a box, or maybe several boxes, because they may want to sell multiple sizes, for example, for small buildings and large buildings. And they would put that IBB software that I mentioned earlier, the open source software, in their boxes and ship that.
Right. So like Cisco, it doesn't, not IBB, but they have kind of their proprietary version of this, right? They call it, it's part of their Catalyst platform. So their Catalyst platform you can install third-party Docker components.
Does Jake stand a chance of doing that?
I don't, since I would be a Jake and I haven't done it, I don't know.
I don't think you're a Jake, Anna, with all respect.
I don't know enough to know whether a Jake could do it, to be honest. I only know enough about it, of their capabilities as to, but who could actually do the install. My guess is it's a IT person that would have to install Docker into the Cisco Catalyst.
I think Jake is actually potentially more than one person. I started to write a reply on our earlier email that was going back and forth, but I found it in my not sent file. But so we do a lot of big deployments, and they're for all different brands, all different systems and so forth. And rarely do we know a whole lot about configuration or software part of it. It's go install the hardware, make sure it's powered up, connected. There's some minimal test that the unit goes through to understand that it's, wired correctly and up and running. And then we go on to the next one, and somebody else does the rest of that configuration. So Jake, in my mind, doesn't have to be an HVAC person necessarily. It is somebody who is, was turning screws and mounting devices and hooking up wires.
Yep.
And that's it, right? So there's a further segmentation in duties here that I think is important to understand. And then because everything is cloud native and accessible, once that's installed and up there, then anyone from anywhere can go to be Mandy, basically, is what we're saying, and get that up and running. So
I think sorry.
And as I was saying, Mandy could be IT and get some of the basic container stuff set up and that part of it. And there could be somebody else who is an HVAC, knows enough about the true HVAC engineer, knows Niagara, for instance, or some of these other applications that are then jumping on and doing something too.
Yeah, in fact, if I was an IT company, not Cisco, and knowing that Cisco's got Catalyst and I wanted to build a competitive product, I'd be building an IBB on my platform, right?
There you go. And probably, in addition to building an IBB, probably provide some additional services, consulting, whatever, if that's what they're in business to do. Yeah.
I would imagine a lot of the box builders like Cisco's or some of these other companies that make routers and Wi-Fi devices and so forth, they're going down that path of making their devices more compatible with different protocols easily. So it would seem to be a good target for them to have a device like this that could be utilized for more than just providing Wi-Fi to everybody.
There's some chat on the Zoom chat about jobs and different people. I totally agree. I haven't read every single word of the comments, but this opens up a lot of opportunities for different skill people, right? And one of the things that it does is it sort of removes the need for you to be a DevOps guy. right? You can be a Jake, you can be a Jake or less than a Jake, like the installer that Tracy was talking about, or you can be a Jake, that guy that's really focused on energy or really focused on, I don't know, grid signals or whatever, and they can just use the IBB in the same way that Jake was using it, either locally or remotely.
I think an important factor of all this is creating the ecosystem around this, right? And the ecosystem includes a number of different roles, from installers to app developers and so forth, right?
And also don't forget, the IBB provides a mechanism so that somebody is given responsibility to manage it, right? If you have a building with a dozen gateways in it, who's managing all of that? The likelihood is somewhere between nobody and some people, right? But you have a Jake, you have a Mandy kind of role, right? Mandy may be working in the IT department on the owner, or maybe working for a managed service provider, right? But that role could be paid for and could have the accountability to actually manage security issues and everything else, because it's a substantive thing that can be managed locally or remotely. Again, adds to the sort of experiential thing that nobody really has to worry about, you know, was it really done right, because somebody's responsible for it.
You know, and it is a problem in our industry that quite often you have to have an individual who knows a number of different roles, has different depths, can install and turn screws and mount and get on a computer and configure. The ability to break those roles up into smaller and smaller tasks, I think, makes this infinitely more scalable and supportable.
And trainable.
And trainable.
Right.
And well, because I think the goal here, correct me if I'm wrong, is to make all aspects of getting this implemented to look very familiar to other roles that they're already doing. This won't look really different to an IT person. It, you know, the guy I was talking about doesn't care if he's screwing a Jace on the wall or an IBB on the wall and wiring it, right? It's just wires and screws to him or her. So I think segmenting all of those roles is an important outcome of this to make it more scalable.
Yeah.
I just think, I can't remember, someone brought it up in the discussion. I think it was actually, no, I can't remember. Don't know if the term tenant might be a bit of a broad persona.
Yeah.
It kind of implies, in some context, the receptionist of the tenant to someone else. I'm not sure if you want to, if you want to be that broad.
Yeah, the persona needs to be much more about the person's character, skill, ability, etc.
Right.
Agree.
Okay.
That may be working for a tenant.
Yeah, it's still, I know what you mean by tenant. You mean tenant as the body.
Yeah.
And the people, the skill set of the body person in that particular body, but potentially not the receptionist. Right. Although, unless she or he's trained, right? Maybe they can.
Steve, were you about to jump in? No.
Nope.
Okay. So is this, you know, the big question for this group is, this is the vision, right? This is what we're working towards. But is this helpful to move the industry forward? Especially, that's really the question in my mind.
So let me come at it from a different perspective, because it's germane to some discussions I've been having the last couple of weeks. And I'll bring in my favorite IoT guys one more time. One of the challenges that I hear from building owners is, you know, I've got 6 IoT companies, all with 6 gateways, going back to the gateway model, right? With 6 gateways, with 6 pieces of hardware, 6 cybersecurity
problems
that I have to solve, upgrades, putting it all in a box and all that sort of stuff. I think from a perspective of at least starting with perception, right? From an owner's perspective of at least starting from a perspective of there's one convergence point, which happens to be IBB. If the IoT guy can't, can't put it in that box, you'd have to wonder. I think IoT companies these days are probably going to have a much better chance of working with an IBB than, say, legacy big controls companies, right? They're going to be closer because most of them have done some sort of, open platform, Docker, and most of them have been, sort of cloud native ready in some context. So I think you're going to get a lot of attention and attraction from the IoT guys. And one of the other things that it does is, which is also interesting, the IoT guys are always highly concerned that you're going to connect to their, to their stuff directly and not to their cloud, because their VC wants the cloud to be, wants the IoT company to be a SaaS model, right? And any sort of universal gateway on site that potentially eliminates their cloud SaaS thing is always a bit scary for them, because it goes counter to their story. But in a lot of ways, this protects them from that model.
The business model needs to be a big part of this discussion.
Yeah.
At some point, because it goes to motivations and who's willing to invest what to get us there, right? So there's still, if we're changing that model a little bit, to your point, what replaces it? Right. And companies will be asking, is what replaces it something that I can do? Is that my role in the world?
Yeah. Does it make my life better or worse?
Right.
That's the question.
Yeah. So so maybe a way simply asking the question are the vendors or the vendor I'm going to buy my IBB from, could it be Honeywell or would it be Cisco or somebody else altogether? Right. So, if it's going to be a major controls company, you got to question whether the IBB is going to be sufficiently independent and committed to supporting anything and everything. It goes against the entire history of the industry, right? If you come at it from a Cisco perspective, you might have a better chance. However, the box is going to probably be pretty pricey and might preclude adoption of the IBB in an industry that doesn't like to pay $10,000 for a box.
But you can do both, right? You can do both.
You can do both what?
IBB can be available from Cheapo Co. that will sell it for 500, and it can be could be available from Cisco that will charge 10,000.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Right? The same IBB from a software vendor perspective, will work in either one.
Well, you can do the Linux model, right? Linux versus Red Hat. You can go get your own Linux and do it yourself.
Right.
At a GitHub, or you could go buy Red Hat because you're an enterprise and because you want all the support and all the capabilities that Red Hat brings to the Linux, right?
Yeah, it probably needs to be thought of more like an additional capability or feature set to a Cisco, as opposed to a change in their business model, right? So it's an add-on. Whereas others, it's going to be something completely different. And that's been rolling around in my head too, Steve, exactly what you said. And that's why I said, what will be the motivations, both positive and negative, right? We have to manage, for this to come to fruition, we have to manage those who would try to break it down and make it crumble.
Right.
Which is a sizable it's a sizable force against moving things forward.
Right.
having lived some of that in my history, actually.
You know, well, interestingly enough, on the positive side, it could well be some of the cybersecurity guys. Like, for example, Iodium. Iodium's inode runs in a container Dockerized. Can say container and Docker at the same time. Containerized model today, but they kind of do their own hardware, right? So you could see, I could see some of the cybersecurity guys stepping up to this, like including it as part of their solution platform.
Yeah, it has to be, if it's going to be disruptive, which is what I think we're talking about, it likely needs to be from an outside type of company or company. To get
All right,
this.
so we're well past the top of the hour.
Yeah.
So this has been great. We probably will continue this next week. We're going to talk about, we had planned to talk about technology, but maybe we should talk about how this gets implemented or something like that. We'll talk on Wednesday and figure it out. Okay. So thanks everyone for being here. Thanks the audience for being here, and the conversation has been great. And hope everybody has a great week, and we'll see everyone next week.
See you all. Thanks.
Bye-bye.